a way of transforming something that's very private, which is a book that's on your shelf, into something very public. We're using a very simple gesture, which is to give it to a library. And it comes from a very simple place. We just realized that we have a lot of books we haven't read, and this is really stupid. And actually, a lot of the books that we haven't read, we don't want to read, just for various reasons. Because maybe it's because at the time when we bought the book, we are a different person from now that we have chosen not to read the book. But I think also at the same time, there's also this kind of fetish, of the object of the book. That sometimes you're seduced to buy this thing, and it's really because you want to consume it at that point, but actually you don't really want it somehow. So there's all these different reasons, and if you go through the books, some of the books have the reasons why the person donated the book, and some of it is really heartbreaking. Like one of the books, I was just showing Ye that if this guy from Cyprus who wrote, it's a book that my lover left in the house, and I just don't want to read it. So it's heartbreaking. And there's also books that talk about like books that have been given to them, let's say, and they're like, why? I don't even want this book, and it's only out of courtesy that the person keeps it but never reads it. So it's kind of what you see around you is a kind of a harbor or consolidation or collection of unwanted knowledge, let's say, things that people don't want to, especially with regards to the idea of reading. We are also very concerned about how we show the library. So we have like small, almost silly rules that we kind of like, which is one, we agree that we will never build furniture for the library. Like we won't build plinths or, like this for us it's a very wasteful thing. With every exhibition we build like a wall or a plinth. It's a lot of material involved. And this material is always like discarded somehow afterwards. So we are telling ourselves that every time the library goes to a new place, we will just use whatever is available, just the tables or the chairs. If there are no tables or chairs, maybe we can borrow some tables. So it's always about depending on the generosity of somebody else that the library can happen. We also agree that we will never rent our own space for the library, that the library must always be within something else. This is a very simple reason to basically perform a kind of parasitic role with institutions. So we believe that actually there's actually a lot of people who are already coming to spaces like museums or schools or whatever. So actually there's always a kind of audience for these spaces that I think the library could also make use of. So and also I think the library can also bring a new audience to these institutions. So it's kind of a give and take sort of thing. We will run the library for 10 years. So from September last year, we started that we will do this for 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, we will close the collection. And then all the books will go to one institution. So that they must run it as a library. They cannot run it as an artwork. They cannot have a room with books and then nobody can go in. You know what I mean? They must allow people to use it as a library. So that is our sort of aspiration for the library itself. So the library only works if you come to donate books to it, and then it will somehow become something else when it's somewhere. So it's a kind of an object that's constantly changing and transforming with everyone's intention to be a part of it, let's say. And unfortunately, it's a reference library, so we cannot allow you to borrow books because there's no way we can trace you, like track you down. So we thought very hard about this, and it's actually also nice that we somehow force people to come here to read. And actually in Singapore, it was very interesting that we opened the library every Friday, only every Friday for 6 months, between 12 noon and 12 midnight. And we get the most people, come to the library at about 9 to 12 in the evening, which is interesting for us. I think it's because it's also like, I don't know if you understand Singapore, it's kind of a boring place and people don't really know where to go. And I think it's nice that it also functions as a space for where people go to that they don't necessarily would dream of going to. So it's kind of a hideout space as well, which is interesting. So yes, so bring your books and be a part of the library. So for today's talk, I'm just going to talk about a few works that have links or relations to the idea of books and of collecting books and collections of books and stacks and piles, like everything that has to do with books and literature influence. So from 2003 onwards, I told myself that I would make one stack every year. And they're always kind of like a bit pathetic. They're always sort of installed on the floor, so it's kind of dangerous. People often walk into them, people break them a lot. So there's really this tension between these objects and the space for me, that you see that it's kind of a fragile thing or situation that's always placed in the space. So the title of the work always corresponds with the titles of the books. For example, the title of this work will be called Foucault's Pendulum, the Elementary Particles, Pattern Recognition, what we talk about when we talk about love. So again, it's always installed on either the floor or sort of an existing structure, like you see here. I quite like that you're always like looking down on the work, and you have to like sort of switch your viewpoint in order to look at the work, because it's always on the floor somehow. So this piece is called Everyday Life in the Modern World. What is the artist's role today? Protest and intimacy. Black holes and time warps, the possibility of an island, the practice of everyday life, voyage to the end of the room. Against the day, stopping the process, all tomorrow's parties, the man in the high castle. So in fact, these are all books that I've read in that year, and at the end of every year, I would sort of make a selection of books that I think somehow makes sense for that year. So in a way, it's autobiographical. They are somehow also like portraits of myself. And the glasses, okay, this is like a big issue with museums that I have with the glasses, because of course I had bought the glasses, I didn't make them. But what happens is that I use the glasses to drink water or whatever, gin and beer, like for that whole year. So they are not mere glasses. There's this kind of like performative element to it that makes them more than glasses. So in a way, if you break them, you can't replace them. So they are actually unique objects rather than sort of some mass-produced objects. And I think that's always the tricky part. The Wind Up Bird Chronicle, A Fall of Moon Dust, Correction, Blindness. There's also an intention to make kind of like an invisible object somehow, and also install it in ways that can seem invisible. For example, like sometimes it's just installed in someone's office, like this, at the side. And you can't quite tell whether it's just office supplies or the artwork, which I kind of like. So sometimes it's also precariously sort of installed as part of the architecture of the space, like this, like stairwell, then there's a sort of a landing space. From December 2nd to 9th, 2006, Dublin has been home to a graphic designer, a filmmaker, 2 visual artists, 2 critics, and 3 curators who have come together to collectively envision a future. Housed in the Project Art Center bar, typing away at their laptops and scribbling plot scenes and characters across the walls, the 8 amateur novelists Heman Chong, Cosmin Costinus, Rosemary Heather, Francis McKee, David Branford, Steve Rushton, Leigh Magnan-Targan, and Mark Ariel Waller have pulled it off. Philip, a new science fiction novel, will be launched on January 13, 2007. So this is a project I did almost 10 years ago in Dublin. It's called Philip, where I had gathered a bunch of people to collectively work on and edit a science fiction novel. And this has to be done in 7 days. So a lot of the photos that I show you sort of resemble like internet cafes, where internet cafes are still around. And it's because we were dead serious on finishing the novel in 7 days. We kind of wrote in a bar because we didn't want to write over time. So we would gather in the morning at 9 and then write till 6. Then the bar opened, so we had to like run away from the bar. So it sort of like stops us from like going, like writing too much in a way. We didn't really have like a word restriction, but we knew that we wanted to have a novel that had a beginning, a middle, and an end. So quite a sort of conventional, typical novel. But all of that emotion that was present when you were taking it is kind of transmuted into something else. It's become an object, and it could be a very beautiful object and a successful photograph, but in a lot of ways it ellipses the original feeling. He says it would have become foreign to him. Whereas if he writes it, the scene, the desire, the failure, it actually retains the emotional trace. He says writing is melancholic, and that's why it can preserve the feeling, the loss, in a way the image can't. He wrote, "In order to play the theme 840 times in succession, it would be advisable to prepare oneself beforehand and in the deepest silence through serious immobility." He wrote, September 27, 1994, New York City. Dear Andrea, how does one begin the day? I guess I never take anything for granted, and I hope I never do. These days, I begin the days with a certain excitement, a certain desire to actually get up from bed, to do new things, to new beginnings. It is impossible for me to be the way I was before. Impossible. The marks left on me are indelible, and I have certainly learned many lessons, perhaps against my will. But here we are. And how do I feel? I feel I am ready for new traveling, travels, travelers, travelogue, and the rest. And how do I feel? I feel something is missing this year, a void, a certain lack, not having the show in your space. My lab of ideas, my place of testing, always a new voice. And how does one create a new voice every so often? Am I too rushed? Trying to say as much as possible before this journey is over? Yes. But that is the way it is. That is what we have to face. How does one learn not to fear the night any longer? That the darkness comes and one can actually go to sleep and sleep until the next day and get up without this metallic and bitter taste in one's mouth, the taste of guilt, desire for death, the desire for a quick and final end. I guess one cannot learn these things They just sink into our bodies in a very subtle way, yet it is definite. It is there, and we can sense it. How good. I am ready for new travels, to new routes. Felix. A lot of the books I've painted covers of, I haven't read, and they actually come from a list of books that my friends have recommended me to read. So I'm kind of flying blind here. So they're not representations. You know what I mean? So most of it I don't know, and some of it I have read in post-mortem. But at the same time, I find it very interesting to sort of like collapse painting into graphic design, and then at the same time adding sort of like literature in a way, or books, the idea of literature to the mix. So there's all this sort of like things going on in the work itself. Some people see them as paintings, some people refuse to see them as paintings, some people see them as simulations of paintings, let's say. So I kind of exist in this space where I think these kinds of questions are very interesting for me, and I don't see why artists should avoid these complexities. I often sort of talk about my work in a way that is really I talk about my work in the sort of the framework of confusion, simply because I feel that I'm not interested in artists or art making when it comes from a place of clarity. So for me, the more ambiguous, the more confusing, the more like sort of messy, it works better for me, let's say. So these are the sort of strategies that I often employ in my work, which is to constantly digress. I think digression is like a big thing in my work, where if I encounter one object, I would just immediately jump to the next object, and then from that I would jump even further to the next, until what you are looking at, it's almost impossible to trace the origins of where this object comes from. So that is more or less sort of the basis in which I work. I'm not sure if I want to show all 366
No.
which I have. We'll leave it for later. This is another sort of work that I enjoy doing. It's very similar to the book covers. It's when I first worked with Jocelina, with Yeye on the second Singapore Biennial, and we thought about having this like ridiculously big billboard in the middle of nowhere in a car park, let's say, and that just has like a title of a book. And of course we had to choose Garcias, because it's our favorite writer. And so it's more or less kind of it looks small here, it's actually huge. It's like this, the scale. So it's like 7 meters high and 10 meters across. So it's kind of interesting, like from far, it almost looks like a pop-up window you would open on your desktop, that you can't quite tell the scale of until you go very near to it. Oh, sorry. And for me, that scale is interesting, and I kind of think of this series of work as billboards. Sometimes they're just like light boxes on sides of buildings, which work for me as well as billboards. So it's somehow again an ambiguous object, like what is this? So people who have read the book will obviously know that it's a book, but if you haven't read the book, then it's hard to describe what it is and stuff like that. There are versions available in translation too. This is 100 Years of Solitude in Korean at the border of the DMZ. And there was a typhoon, so it got destroyed. When they sent me this photo, I was like, shit, I killed someone. You know? I'm just going to jump straight to the bookshops.
The Korean billboard got destroyed at EMC.
The Korean billboard got destroyed.
Was it an accident?
It was an accident.
Okay.
Well, that's what they told me. Something that I enjoy very much when I make shows with institutions that have bookshops is to ask for a shelf that I could have, that during the exhibition I would bring a bunch of secondhand books from my reading list, that they could sell them as secondhand books. And the work is called Inclusion, so you have the word inclusions on the left. So you know, it's quite interesting, you go to a bookshop and you see like architecture, art, urbanism, then suddenly you see inclusions. For me it's cool. No? So it's something I enjoy a lot, also playing the role of like a bookseller, because I think it's a very interesting way of creating or subverting the idea of a commercial space, let's say. So this is the first bookshop I built. It's called Lamp One, and it's a bookshop that only sells science fiction novels and fantasy novels, science fiction and fantasy. So there's about like 3,000 volumes that I had like hoarded over the years, and I just sort of made a bookshop out of it. And it was installed in like a commercial gallery, so the commercial gallery they weren't allowed to sell art for the whole time of the exhibition. They were only allowed to sell secondhand books. So this displacement for me is super interesting. And it was very popular because we sold it like very cheap. But we also bought it very cheap because I found a very good way, which is to buy entire collections of people's books that they don't want. Like, so I would get like 10 boxes of someone's books, and I would just like sort out the science fiction books, and I would resell whatever other books. You know what I mean? So in the end, actually, it made money. You know. So yeah, the second-hand book market is actually quite lucrative. But for me, it's still an art object. It's not even a shop, you know what I mean? So for me, what I'm actually looking at is not the money or whatever. It's really, I could have this possibility to have like 3,000 science fiction and fantasy books in one place. But at the same time, you know, I'm very against this idea of having an object in a space and you couldn't touch it. You know, it's kind of horrible, you know? So, I mean, the only way around that is to make it a shop that people could like, okay, I'm gonna like touch it and look at it before I buy it, you know. And the reason why I don't give things out for free is because people will take everything, okay? I'm sorry, it's true. Like if you charge like a little bit of money, people will start to like pick what they like and what they need, you know. I've been asked this question many times, like, why don't you give the books away for free? Because people will just take like 10 boxes. Even if they don't want it, you know. So this is the neon sign for Lamp One. So it's always like kind of like a sign that's like a bit sleazy somehow, which I like, you know. We brought it. So the first time I showed it was in London, which was a bit pointless because there were like hundreds of bookshops in London. But what I found very interesting was when I brought this bookshop, this science fiction bookshop, to Sharjah in the Middle East. Because it was really the only bookshop in Sharjah that wasn't a religious bookstore. So basically people came like by the truckloads just to look at books. Because it was like there were no bookshops in the whole city, you know. And it was actually very small, and none of the books were censored because the museum was run by, you know, the sheikh's daughter. So it evaded that, you know. I don't know if you know this. This is the artist Shimabuku. Yeah.
So yeah, it worked for me. It worked really, really well to have a science fiction and fantasy bookshop, uncensored in like the UAE, you know, under the auspices of, you know, the princess. This is a bookshop that I made last year, which I'm very, very happy with, and was part of my solo show at the Rock Band Art Museum in Shanghai. It's a bookshop that contains about 300 books on sale, and I had hired, I don't know if you know him, his name is Ken Liu. He's a translator of science fiction books. He translated The Three-Body Problem. So he's quite a famous, like in the science fiction circles as a translator. But he's also, in his day job, he's a lawyer. So I hired Ken, and I said, Ken, can you make me a bookshop that will help me navigate the nebulous legal systems of China? So basically he gave me a list of about 200, 300 books that talked a lot about strategy, about chess playing, about diplomacy, a lot of sort of political memoirs, a lot of Philip K. Dick. I don't know how Philip K. Dick is going to help me navigate China, but yeah, okay. So it's also very important for me that during my solo show at the Rock Band Art Museum that we don't have a gift shop. I hate gift shops. So I made them take up the entire gift shop on the first floor, and we just made this bookshop. It works for them because they actually earn more money against selling books. This is crazy, but it's true. So in the end, they were happy about it too. But it was actually hard to convince them to give up the gift shop because it's like an addiction, you know, the gift shop with institutions. So again, like you know, I'm kind of economical with my installations. I tend not to want to build new things, so I just use all the existing stuff. So I made them take out all the gift shop stuff, and I just put the books on the tables. These are some of the books that Ken has chosen. Like a lot of books that involve like card games and, you know, a bit of Levi-Strauss, a little bit of philosophy, I think. A lot of John Grisham, which is weird for me. A lot of books about systems, I think. But I kind of get it. It's about, you know, sort of like playing with a game that is constantly changing, right? Susan Sontag, I don't get that, but yeah, okay. This is another bookshop that I made, which has a quite a long story to it, which I was invited to do, to be a part of a show, and the curator had found me a bookshop that I could work with. So I started talking to the bookshop, and I said, oh, could I use your bookshop for these months that you will only sell books from one author? And I chose the science fiction writer Stanislaw Lem. He said, yes, I love this idea, we'll do it. And a month before the show started, the bookshop closed. So he went out of business, and I was like, what's going on? He's like, I ran out of money. I was like, I have no money. He's like, okay, good. So basically, then I decided that instead of finding a new bookshop, that we will make like a homeless bookshop, like just a book stand, you know, which is actually quite common, like a sort of a flea market stand, which sells my entire collection of Stanislaw Lem. So yeah, it's quite simple. For those who don't know Stanislaw Lem, he wrote a very important novel called Solaris, which was made into, you know, the Russian film by Tarkovsky in '72, and then there was a new version by Steven Soderbergh in 2002, which stars George Clooney. Actually, I like the second, this is sacrilegious, but I actually like the second version more, don't you? Like homoerotic. So yeah, like we moved the books sort of stall all around in different places because it was very mobile. And actually, I kind of like it more that it's not like in a bookshop, you know. Most of my projects, when it involves books, I will have like a stamp. You will see this in all the books here too. So it's just a little description that talks about why this book is in your hands, let's say. You know. Okay, any questions? Thank you very much for your time.